Okay, we are here with Areli, Barerra, Groski of Little Waves Coffee, Cocoa and Cinnamon, Durham, North Carolina. Welcome.
Muchas gracias.
Yes, I am really excited to talk to you. You do it all. I mean, you're a green buyer, roaster, barista, owner, and that's been your career in coffee. You started in coffee in 2009, but you, in 2010, opened this business. And so you've been doing this for a bit now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels weird to say that.
And in all that hard work, I mean, you've obviously made an impact on the industry, and you're the Micro Roaster of the Year. Roast Magazine's Micro Roaster of the Year, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Take us to the foundation of this, because there's so many colorful elements of what you do with your businesses, and that doesn't happen accidentally. That's something that's values and missions driven.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the driving mission behind Little Waves, like when you first started it, and how did that come about?
First of all, thank you for having me here.
Yes.
Yes, so I feel like for me, it's always been about alignment, right? It's about using coffee as a vehicle to align to our highest self, whether we're doing that through the way that we're hiring, the way that we show up for our work, the way that we buy coffee, the way that we roast our coffee, asking the coffee what it needs from us. Just like we have this idea within our business called Entbergen, and I'm butchering it because it's an old German. I can't even, Heidegger. I was going to say Hundertwasser. That's not even right.
That sounds like a great beer.
Yes. But the idea is for things to unconceal themselves.
Oh.
And so to kind of allow relationships, and in this case coffee, to kind of reveal itself to you, to show you what its potential is, and for you to use your tools and your resources to allow that to shine.
Wow. I like that.
Thank you. And I think that's been our approach with everything that we do. And, me being from Mexico and being an immigrant Latina in the United States, feeling like I grew up straddling two cultures, never feeling enough in either, but like kind of coming into my own with that mentality of like, who am I trying to prove anything to, besides myself?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like all of that is encompassed in what we do within coffee. And I think that's one of the reasons why coffee is such a popular place for creatives and for people who are seeking and searching.
That makes a lot of sense. I love this idea of the unfolding truth of a thing, or uncovering what it wants, unconcealing. Yeah. And it feels like that's a personal journey that you were taking on
100.
while you were taking on coffees, discovering coffee, discovering yourself in the process, right?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So is that something that it's something I think coffee shops do for people too? Like, you as a professional, you're revealing what the coffee has to offer. You're unveiling it to the customer, and you're changing yourself, but the customer also is being impacted by what you're doing.
Yeah.
How do you translate that value that you just described to the customer experience?
I feel like you have to meet people's energies, right? Like, I think it's really important to make coffee feel accessible and approachable, even when it's something that you cherish and that you want people to take seriously too. Even when it's just like their daily ritual or their daily habit. Sometimes it's deeper than a habit. Sometimes it's just a habit. Sometimes I just need my coffee to wake up. And as a barista and working in customer service, whether you're the roaster or a barista, I feel like you're always having to meet the customer's energy, bring everything that you have, that knowledge of the coffee, and figure out what little bits are going to make an impact on this particular person.
Interesting. And you have to have a certain amount of self-knowledge in order to exercise that discernment, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. So when you first started, though, in coffee. Was that something that you immediately were like, this is something I need to do with coffee? And if so, or how did that go? Like when the first year that you started Little Waves, was it fulfilling or was it frustrating? Was it just like testing you to see if you could actually like pull that off? Like how were your values challenged in that first year?
I think that coffee is every single thing that you just said. It's rewarding, it's challenging. Owning a business is really hard. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is for those who are ready to adapt and to think outside the box and to... I feel like we started our business with $75 in the bank and like no access to credit, and this is out there, that information isn't new, but I think that being able to come out of that and make it happen is a mentality, and I think that same mentality is what has gotten us through the pandemic. But it's not just that mentality, it's also the relationship building with your community and the community trusting you that you're doing what you say you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes I was thinking as you were saying that you, when you're bootstrapping like that in a business, it can either be a discouragement, or it can help you shape your priorities. So, because you only have so much you can do with so little. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to choose your shots.
Yes.
And the way that you did things in the first year, what did you do to say, okay, we have a limited amount that we can do right now.
Yeah.
In order to make sure that we have a second year, what do we do in the first year?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we decided early on that we didn't want to work other 9-to-5s. So we had a very, very, very tight budget to survive. But that allowed us to put all of our energies forth towards the business and continuing to build that. And, while we started on a bike, that bike, also took a lot of work to build because we didn't have the money to buy the bike. We borrowed money to buy the bike. And then we asked our Willie, our Willie.
Yeah, everyone has it.
Yes, everyone has a Willie in their life. I hope so. Willie is my mother-in-law's partner, and he helped us weld a frame for the bike. And so little by little, we were able to scrap together this bike that we then rode to farmers markets. Literally, there's no motor on this. Durham was way hillier than we expected, and I would literally be pushing Leon up a hill.
Whoa.
I think that was a blessing in disguise to start in that fashion in Durham in 2011 because the community saw how hard we were working. And we got to connect with the community via this bike. And we wanted to serve espresso off of this bike, but because of how hilly and how heavy the bike already was, we ended up doing pour-overs. Again, we're we have this set plan and we have to shift our plan because it's not working.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's really valuable to have a plan in mind and have a plan set for yourself for success, but don't be so structured to that plan. I think that the plan sets you up for success, and yet when you see a moment that needs to be deviated, you need to deviate. You need to be flexible within a structure.
Well, how did you and maybe do you define success?
That's a great question, and I think that's very different for everyone.
Right.
I think surviving every single day is a success,
Especially these days, yeah.
Staying married in a partnership is a success and thriving, I think, especially in these days, making it through another day during the pandemic. When the pandemic first hit, we were, thinking that this was going to be 8 days.
I remember that, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be over.
Yeah, we were but even that was so scary to us because we were there's no way that we can close for 8 days. We're going to go out of business if we close for 8 days.
Yeah.
And so we started thinking about what are the ways that we can reduce costs right now while, trying to maintain open and keep our team safe. And Leon is a brilliant mind, and most of his greatest ideas come when he's like about to wake up, like almost in a dream state.
Okay.
But he was just like, he put out a tweet saying like, I don't know what made him do the math, but he was like, we need to sell 230 bags of Little Waves coffee to survive this pandemic, to like keep our team employed. And so that tweet got like retweeted and retweeted and retweeted and picked up by the news media, and overnight Little Waves grew.
Wow. Okay.
And we had to like, you know, I think that we benefited from the West Coast having a little bit of a head start on how to problem solve staying open through the pandemic. And so we were kind of looking to our colleagues to see how they like were able to stay open while being closed indoors. I still remember the first days of the pandemic and how hard they were mentally and emotionally for all of us. It's still mentally and emotionally hard for all of us. Of course. But I feel like success is a measurement of, I think for me, success is also a measurement of who's around you, who has stuck around, you know, what you're building and how it's benefiting the community, I think is success. There's so many like definitions for this. I think abundance is already happening, whether, you know, I recently heard two amazing women that were talking about abundance, and one of them said, for me, abundance is when you can say no. And then the other one replied, that's everybody. I was like, yes. Abundance is our inheritance. We're all tapped into it, right? And yet there's societal issues, right? And I feel like, I feel like coffee brings us back to that alignment. And I was just talking to somebody before coming here about just like wanting to embody ancestors and like help them get me to say what I need to say on this podcast, like to speak through me, right?
Right.
I feel like success is such a big thing. I don't think that there's one definition for it, and I think everyone has a different measurement for it.
I like when you said thriving.
Yeah.
Earlier in it seems like that's what we're all after, is a sense of thriving, and the idea, like you just mentioned, of saying no, is one of not just satisfaction but fulfillment in what you're doing. And at the same time, you're in an industry where there's a lot of ways to do things that you can see, and we all adapt and we use the tools at our disposal. Like, my coffee bar is going to look like this, the way I handle my staff and disagreements or scheduling and all the other stuff that happen there. In the roastery, there's a whole different, set of problems than in the cafes, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult to take that values-based, very core belief that you have and apply it to what seems like very mundane things, but it seems necessary.
Yeah.
And so my question is, how do you apply these principles in the daily work in building Little Waves?
Yeah.
And how does that translate into the products that you create now? And how do people resonate with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's in the name, right? Little Waves. Daily actions that you choose that are intentional to make a change, make an impact, really, not a change, but an impact, to shift how you do work, to shift how you source coffee. I think for me, going back to success, I just want to I think that the way that we source coffee at Little Waves is, we call it a heart-driven approach or an open-hearted approach. Both, to me, are very similar. And it's about taking into account the well-being and honoring everyone along the supply chain. And it's not just about making money. Money is something that helps us stay open and helps us pay people a livable wage. But at the end of the day, it's about those relationships and the well-being of those relationships and everyone thriving within this system.
Right. So your customers feel taken care of.
Yes.
Your baristas feel taken care of. And then the farmers.
Yes.
I mean, it feels like these are the three categories, and yourself.
Yeah.
Right? 4 categories. Right? Because if you burn out trying to make everybody else, quote unquote successful or thriving, that's no good. Right?
Yeah.
So you have to have an open-hearted approach to yourself.
Absolutely.
As an owner.
Absolutely.
In the midst of that.
Oof, a word.
How do you so when you grow, when you win awards, as you have, right? When you do these things, how do you protect those relationships? So, because a lot of times when people grow, their mindset starts to get narrower and not more open. So it's a big task to be open-hearted, but also grow. How does that work?
I mean, growth is for everyone's benefit. Like, I think that we've always approached growth from an intentional growth mindset. Like, it's about growing for the sake of meeting our goals. And what are our goals? Our moonshot goals, right? That we've been working on since day one of building creating our business plan. Really just looking at the way that we use the patterns of buying and selling to create the life that we want to lead and that we want to live in. And, looking around, this was me and Leon during our first, our honeymoon. I say it in quotes because it was a trip that we planned before we were romantically involved, and then we got married, and then we went on this trip that we called our honeymoon.
Yes.
Convenience. But it was my first time in Europe. We were in Sweden, and I was really impacted by seeing how, everyone owned their own homes, and everyone had healthcare, and the way that downtown was structured was all about pedestrians and not cars. And, it was just like the concept of putting people first. And I say that from a tourist mindset because I don't live there and I don't know the intricacies or the complexities that may exist there.
Sure.
And no one's perfect, nothing's perfect, and that's not what we're striving for either. But that really inspired us to think about how do we use our business to create that. Like, basics are met and people can have enough to live comfortably. And to focus on the things that bring you to life. And we want that not just for ourselves, for our team, but for the people who are producing these amazing coffees.
Okay.
And that's a long journey, unfortunately. It doesn't have to be, though.
Well, it's a long journey in some sense because we're really practiced at the product being the coffee, physical coffee itself, right? And kind of divorcing the human element of the product is very convenient to make an efficient system that produces a product. Mm-hmm. But when you're talking about relationships and things that are not perfect, because the people you love the most also drive you the craziest oftentimes, and this is, so we don't want to risk relationships sometimes when we're talking about business because we want to keep it separate. Maybe it's self-protective or something, but you're producing relationships, not just coffee. Like the product that you're trying to create sounds more like you're trying to create a new reality for the people that are under your particular umbrella as a business.
Yeah, it's our goal to create trust in those relationships so that, when a producer has a bad year, they can trust that we can have a conversation about it and they can rely on us. Right. We just got our coffees in from Baho, who's a exporter, producer, and washing station owner in Rwanda. Ben Bowden, who is from 1,000 Faces, also owns Sundog Trading, and he created that solely for bringing in the coffee from Baho. And he was just talking to Leon about how the first year, that we've been in partnership since he first started, and that the first year they had like half a container. The second year it was like he partnered up with somebody in Canada and they had like half a container each, and that this year they both had their own containers.
Wow.
So it's just like this beautiful idea of like networking.
Yeah.
It's people who know people who know people who know people who know people, and they're all helping each other. Like, I think everyone thrives from it. Everyone benefits from these trusting relationships.
Yeah, I like that. And that is the practical application of open-hearted, like you were talking about. If there's a bad year, you're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it leads me to want to ask, like, in the business aspect of Little Waves, what is it that you do to make room for principles and practices like that, so that you can say, okay, we have an outlet, for example, for your coffee that's not exactly the same, but it still enables us to bring in your coffee, even though it's not the same as it was last year.
Yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of, being able to roast a little bit darker if you need to, or, add it into a blend that it makes sense in,
Okay.
I feel like coffee is such a wide range of opportunities, like there are so many people out there that drink coffee, and so many different palates out there that are seeking different flavors.
Yeah.
I think there's a coffee for everybody out there, and that's what gives me hope for being able to like I have a relationship with Carla Bosa, who from El Salvador, and we didn't get her coffee this year, but we got her tia's coffee, because by the time I was ready to buy, she's like, we're out. And I was like, fantastic. But she's like, my tia's like coffee has the same farm practicing, and here's a sample. And that at the end of the, when we received it, she was like, my tia's saying that, for the first time in a while, she doesn't have to get a loan for her crop. And I'm like, that's amazing. Like, this is why we do what we do,
Wow,
Besides the fact that, you're getting me excited here, Chris. The fact that, our entire roastery team is, women of color and, from immigrant backgrounds. I think that slowly more and more roasteries are popping up like that.
Yeah.
But it's still, I always get teary-eyed when I talk about it, and, coming to these places, to, the expo, I feel like, representation is such an important thing. And when I started coming here, my first expo by myself was in 2013 here in Boston, and I just remember looking around to find myself, and sure, I found myself at Origin, but I didn't see myself in the coffee shop owner status. I'm like, where am I? Where are other people like me, Leticia from Panther Coffee, I was gravitating towards her, proximity, I see myself there. But I think it's, like I said, I think that representation is super, super, super important. It's so powerful. It makes the industry better.
Yeah.
And, I'm just so proud too of being a part of the Coffee Coalition for Racial Equity. Phyllis Johnson is the best. I think everyone listening can agree. I think she has been laying the foundation for this coalition for a really long time, and I think it's time for this to take root.
Dive into this a little bit more, because I think people hear a lot of times, they say, representation is important. And they're like, okay, yes. But truly, and we've been talking about this a little bit today about, the power structures in, switching from the consumer to the farmer, for example, and how that's necessary to have long-term solutions. From an ownership point of view, from this end of the supply stream, right? Why is representation important? What does it do to impact change further down the road? Practically speaking, I mean, I feel like I know the answer, but I'm interested to talk about it a little deeper, to say, what are the fruits of that representation in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really quick, from my experience, answer is that when we first opened our doors, we put out our application, and it was predominantly white men that already worked at other coffee shops. And we were like, well, that's not going to do. So we put our application out at NCCU and at El Centro. And like, we were intentional about where we were, seeking for team members. And I think that, we had Susie, who was just here earlier, who's Persian American, and, her presence, was really, her presence was really present in that sense that like another Iranian American saw her and like applied, and I think that like for a while I was the only Latina, but then we had one Latina apply, and then all of her friends applied, and then and both of them are production roasters now, and they applied when they were 16, and now they're in their like late 20s. I feel like it's important for us that our team looks like the people we want to invite into our spaces.
Sure. And
it benefits the industry when you see more representation, because you have different things that you have to take into account, that like in how you build your structures and how you become inclusive. And, we all grow up with different cultures, and we all grow up with different mindsets. And I think when you're open like that and you invite more people into your space and into your life, your perspectives start to broaden, and then you start using that and putting that perspective into how you do business. And I think that you put that in the macro scale, and you look around and it's not just white men.
I think it's interesting to think about how, and it's getting better, of course, but in conferences like this, we know the devastating effect of a lack of genetic diversity in the plant of coffee, socially speaking, right? We have yet to sort of take it as seriously, I think, in what you said about tapping into the different backgrounds of people, right? Different backgrounds that people have represent different ways of thinking, different strengths that they can bring to the industry, and just like serving more people, that open-hearted thing. I mean, this is a movement in coffee, even more accessibly roasted coffees and sourced coffees, and it helps customers get into coffee more. So we're not just like serving ourselves anymore. We're serving real people. And that's, real people are way more diverse than our industry.
Absolutely. And I think that's what the Coalition for Racial Equity is trying to address, but really focusing on Black Americans. And thinking about, we're starting there, we're focusing there, but we're laying a foundation and a blueprint to be used in other communities, And 100%. I think what you just said is very, very true.
When you give advice to people, roasters, potential, shop owners, and people who are going to be the new generation, of professionals, what advice would you give them from your experience running these businesses and the trials that you've gone through with, pushing the bike uphill and going through COVID, and, you're unveiling coffee, but you're finding out stuff about yourself too in the process. Everyone's going to have these moments, but from what you've learned, what do you think they should keep in mind that will help them along their journey? That
they're not alone, because we could not have made this without reaching out to other people, especially during the pandemic. I don't know how many times Kyle and I have texted back and forth. Kyle Remage from Black and White. He's right down the street from us, and I'm freight is delayed. I don't have a decaf. Can I buy a bag from you? Shipping is delayed because of COVID. Can I borrow some bags? Reaching out to other roasters of how they've used, I don't know, a certain piece of machinery in production. And I think it's so important to remember that I think that era of gatekeeping and keeping information close to the chest, I think, is starting to fall to the side, and more and more people are starting to be open to help each other succeed, because it's not really competition, where we all have a market, and like you were saying, like, our customer base is way more diverse than we give it credit for.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, everyone has a place in coffee, and everyone can succeed and thrive, and I think that when you reach out to other people, it gives you that hope back, like, to be able to problem solve something. Like, it's your first time, like, we grew as little waves overnight. I had to learn all about shipping. I know that sounds silly, but, like, I had no idea. I was sending 12-ounce bags priority, and then somebody was like, you send them in poly mailers, it's $5. I was like, okay, thank you for that tip.
That's a big deal.
That's a big deal. Yeah. I feel like, you're not alone. There are people out there who have gone through this. Reach out to them. Excellent. Yeah.
Well, it is awesome to hear you talk about community amongst all this community that we have here at SCA. And I think, if people take to heart what you've said about being open-hearted, I think it's going to be a better industry in the next 10 years. Obviously, you've made a big impact. And so congratulations again, Roaster of the Year.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me here. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.